The gunshot cracked through the dawn like thunder, sending Delilah Evans scrambling beneath the nearest wagon just as the dust from the stagecoach robbery settled on the main street of Cottonwood Springs. It was 1876, and the West was still wild, but nothing had prepared her for watching her father's blood seep into the parched Arizona earth as outlaws made off with the bank's strongbox. "Papa," she whispered, crawling back to him once the bandits had disappeared. His eyes were fixed on the cloudless sky, unseeing. The tears came without warning, flowing freely down her dirt-streaked face as the townsfolk emerged from their hiding places. "Lord have mercy," someone muttered. "Evans is dead." Delilah clutched her father's limp hand, her shoulders shaking with each sob. She'd come west with him after her mother's passing, following his dream of starting anew in a place where opportunity stretched as far as the horizon. Now she was alone, 22 years old and adrift in a harsh, unforgiving land. "Pull yourself together, girl," Mrs. Henshaw, the general store owner's wife, said sharply. "This ain't Boston. Western women don't carry on like that." "Look at her, weeping like a child," another woman whispered, loud enough for Delilah to hear. "How does she expect to survive out here with such weakness?" Delilah tried to stop the tears, but they wouldn't cease. Her father had been her only family, her anchor. The mocking words stung worse than the scorching sun overhead. "That's enough," came a deep voice from behind the gathering crowd. The townspeople parted as a tall figure approached on horseback. Fletcher Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling against the hard-packed dirt. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were kind beneath the brim of his worn leather hat. He couldn't have been more than 30, but there was something in his gaze that spoke of experiences beyond his years. "You don't owe them strength," he said quietly, kneeling beside Delilah. "Not today." The crowd shifted uncomfortably under Fletcher's steady gaze. He was the ranch foreman at the Rocking M, respected and somewhat feared for his skill with both horses and guns. "She needs to toughen up," Mrs. Henshaw insisted. "This territory doesn't forgive weakness." Fletcher stood slowly, his hand resting casually on his holstered Colt. "And decent folks don't mock the grieving." His voice remained even, but there was steel beneath the words. The crowd dispersed, muttering. Fletcher turned back to Delilah, offering a clean handkerchief from his pocket. "I'm sorry about your father, Miss Evans." Delilah took the cloth with trembling fingers. "Thank you," she managed. "I don't know what I'm going to do now." "First, we'll see that your father gets a proper burial," Fletcher said, his tone gentle but practical. "The rest can wait till tomorrow." As the undertaker and his assistant carefully lifted Mr. Evans' body, Delilah felt a strange hollowness settling inside her chest. Fletcher stayed beside her, a silent presence that somehow made the unbearable slightly less so. "Where are you staying?" he asked as they watched the undertaker's wagon roll away. "The boarding house," she replied, suddenly remembering the unpaid bill that awaited her. "Though I'm not sure for how much longer," Fletcher nodded thoughtfully. "The Rocking M is looking for a schoolteacher for the ranch children." "Owner's wife mentioned it just yesterday." Delilah blinked in surprise. "I was a teacher's assistant in Boston before we came west." "Then perhaps there's your answer," Fletcher said, "at least until you decide what comes next." Later that evening, after washing away the dust and tears in her small boarding house room, Delilah stared at her reflection in the spotted mirror. The girl from Boston seemed like a stranger now, a lifetime ago in just 6 months of Western living. Her father had been so certain their fortunes would change here. Now she needed to make her own way. A knock at her door startled her. The landlady, Mrs. Peterson, stood with a tray of food and an envelope. "Mr. Quinn asked me to bring this up," she said, her usual stern expression softened somewhat. "Said you might not feel like coming down for supper." Delilah accepted the tray gratefully. "That was kind of him." "He's a good man," Mrs. Peterson said. "Not one for many words, but fair and decent." She hesitated. "I'm sorry about your father, child, and don't you mind those cackling hens this morning. Most of them have never known real hardship for all their talk of frontier spirit." After Mrs. Peterson left, Delilah opened the envelope. Inside was a note written in a surprisingly neat hand. Miss Evans. I've spoken with Mrs. Montgomery at the Rockingham. She'd be pleased to meet you tomorrow at 10 if you're interested in the teaching position. I can escort you out to the ranch if you wish. My respects, F. Quinn." A postscript added, "Your father spoke often of your education and intelligence. He was proud of you." Fresh tears welled in Delilah's eyes, but these felt different, a bittersweet balm rather than raw pain. She tucked the note under her pillow and tried to eat something from the tray. Tomorrow would come, whether she was ready or not. The following morning dawned clear and already hot when Fletcher arrived with 2 horses. Delilah wore her one good dress, though she'd removed the impractical bustle for riding. Her honey-brown hair was neatly pinned beneath a modest hat, and she'd practiced holding back her tears all night. "Good morning, Miss Evans," Fletcher said, tipping his hat. "I hope you're feeling a bit better today." "As well as can be expected, Mr. Quinn," she replied, studying the second horse with apprehension. "I should warn you that my riding skills are limited." A slight smile crossed Fletcher's face. "Old Bessie here is gentle as a lamb. She could find her way to the Rockingham blindfolded." The ride gave Delilah her first real view of the territory beyond the town limits. The landscape was both brutal and beautiful, rugged mountains in the distance, sprawling rangeland dotted with cattle, and surprising pockets of green where water brought life to the desert. "It's magnificent," she said, almost to herself. Fletcher glanced at her, something like approval in his expression. "Most Easterners only see the hardship, not the beauty." "My father saw both," she said softly. "He used to say that difficulty and wonder often share the same space." Fletcher nodded. Wise man. As they rode, Fletcher pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local history. He'd been in the territory for 12 years, arriving as little more than a boy after the war. There was something soothing about his deep voice and unhurried manner that eased Delilah's grief, if only momentarily. The Rockingham Ranch spread across several thousand acres, with the main house rising from the landscape like a testament to perseverance. Mrs. Montgomery, the owner's wife, greeted them on the wide front porch. "So you're Thomas Evans' daughter," she said, studying Delilah with keen eyes. "I'm sorry about your father. He seemed a decent sort when he helped with our banking arrangements." "Thank you, madam," Delilah replied, standing straighter. "Mr. Quinn mentioned you might need a teacher for the children." "Indeed we do. 5 ranch hands' children and my own 2 youngsters need proper schooling. Can't have them growing up ignorant just because we're 30 miles from civilization." Mrs. Montgomery's direct manner was refreshing after the false sympathy and criticism Delilah had encountered in town. "I was educated at Miss Porter's school in Connecticut, and I assisted at a ladies' seminary in Boston before coming west," Delilah said, hoping her voice conveyed more confidence than she felt. Mrs. Montgomery nodded approvingly. "Fletcher spoke highly of your qualifications. We've converted an old bunkhouse into a schoolroom. It's simple but functional." As Mrs. Montgomery showed her the schoolroom and discussed the children's ages and abilities, Delilah felt a spark of purpose returning. Teaching was something she knew, something that connected her to the life she'd left behind while offering a path forward. "You'd stay in the main house," Mrs. Montgomery explained. "We have a room prepared. The pay is modest but includes your board and lodging." "When would you like me to start?" Delilah asked. "Can you be ready by Monday next? That gives you time to settle your affairs in town." Mrs. Montgomery's tone suggested she expected an affirmative answer. "Yes, I believe I can," Delilah said, realizing that affairs meant burying her father and packing her few belongings. As they rode back to town, the sun beginning its descent toward the western mountains, Fletcher broke the comfortable silence. "You did well today. Mrs. Montgomery is intimidating but fair," Delilah observed. "I think I might actually be able to make a life here." "You're stronger than you know," Fletcher said, his eyes on the trail ahead. "Most folks who mock tears have never had reason enough to shed them." The simple wisdom of his words struck Delilah deeply. "My father would have liked you, Mr. Quinn." "Call me Fletcher," he said. "Everyone does, except the children, who call me Mr. Fletch because they can't manage the whole name." The thought of children mangling his name brought a genuine smile to Delilah's face for the first time since her father's death. "Then you must call me Delilah." Fletcher nodded, the gesture somehow solemn and warm at once. "Delilah it is." The following days passed in a blur of grief and practical matters. The funeral was simple but dignified, with more townspeople attending than Delilah expected. She discovered her father had been well respected despite their relatively short time in Cottonwood Springs. Fletcher attended too, standing quietly at the back until the service ended. Afterward, he approached with his hat in his hands. "I've some business in town the next few days." "I'll help you move your things to the ranch when you're ready," his offer touched her. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose." "It's no imposition," he said firmly. "Roads aren't always safe for a woman traveling alone." Delilah recognized the truth in his words. Just 3 days ago, she might have bristled at the implication that she needed protection. Now, her father's violent death had erased any illusions about safety in this territory. On Sunday morning, Fletcher arrived with a wagon for her trunk and the few household items she'd decided to keep. The boarding house room that had been home for 6 months was stripped bare in less than an hour. "Is that all?" Fletcher asked, eyeing the modest pile. "We traveled light," Delilah explained, running her hand over her father's shaving kit, now carefully wrapped in one of his shirts. "Papa said we could always acquire things, but memories were what weighed most." Fletcher's expression softened. "Wise again," he hesitated. "I have something for you." He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small object, holding it out in his calloused palm. It was a silver hair comb, simple but elegant, with tiny flowers etched into the metal. "It was my mother's," he explained. "Thought you might like something pretty for your new start." Delilah stared at the unexpected gift, emotion rising in her throat. "I couldn't possibly. She'd want someone to use it," Fletcher said quietly. "Been sitting in my saddlebag for 10 years otherwise." The gesture moved her beyond words. She took the comb carefully, running her finger along the delicate pattern. "Thank you, I'll treasure it." The journey to the ranch took most of the day, the wagon slower than horseback. Fletcher pointed out landmarks different from those on their previous ride, explaining the lay of the land with the ease of someone who'd traversed it countless times. "Ambush happened there last spring," he said, nodding toward a rocky outcropping. "Cattle rustlers tried to make off with a dozen head." "What happened?" Delilah asked, curious despite herself. A grim smile touched Fletcher's lips. "They discovered why the Rockingham doesn't lose much stock." As they approached the ranch in the late afternoon, Delilah noticed 2 small figures racing from the main house, followed by a woman frantically waving her arms. "The Montgomery children," Fletcher explained, slowing the wagon. "Elizabeth is 8, James is 6. Both smart as whips and twice as mischievous." The children reached the wagon before their mother could catch them, their faces alight with excitement. "Mr. Fletch, is this our new teacher?" the girl asked, her blonde braids bouncing as she hopped from foot to foot. "Miss Delilah Evans," Fletcher confirmed, helping Delilah down from the wagon. "You do well to mind your manners, Miss Elizabeth." The girl attempted a clumsy curtsy while her brother simply stared, thumb firmly planted in his mouth despite being well past the age for such habits. "Mrs. Montgomery arrived, slightly breathless. "I do apologize for this unruly welcome, Miss Evans. Children, step back and let our new teacher catch her breath before you pester her to death." "It's quite all right," Delilah assured her, smiling at the children. "I'm looking forward to getting to know my students." "You'll have time for that tomorrow," Mrs. Montgomery said firmly. "Fletcher, have one of the hands bring Miss Evans' things to the house. Cook has supper nearly ready, and I imagine you're both famished." The rocking MTK's main house was impressively appointed for a frontier ranch, with actual glass windows and furniture that must have been transported at great expense from back east. Mr. Montgomery, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice, greeted Delilah warmly. "Any friend of Fletcher's is welcome here," he declared, pumping her hand enthusiastically. "Man's saved my bacon more times than I care to admit," Fletcher ducked his head modestly. "Just doing my job, sir." Supper was a lively affair, with the children barely containing their excitement about starting school. Mrs. Montgomery outlined the daily schedule, which would begin with classes from 8 until noon, followed by a lighter afternoon session for the older children while the younger ones napped or had supervised play. Fletcher tells me you've experience with music as well, Mrs. Montgomery said as the meal wound down. We've a piano in the parlor that's scarcely been touched since we had it hauled all the way from St. Louis. I'd be delighted to include music in the curriculum, Delilah said, realizing how much she'd missed playing. It had been her mother's passion, one she'd passed to her daughter before consumption claimed her. After supper, Fletcher excused himself to check on the horses, and Delilah was shown to her room, a comfortable chamber with a real feather bed and curtains at the windows. The simple luxury nearly brought tears to her eyes after months in the sparse boarding house. She unpacked quickly, placing her father's shaving kit on the bureau and carefully tucking Fletcher's gift into her hair. The silver comb caught the lamplight, gleaming against her brown tresses. For the first time in days, Delilah felt something like hope flickering in her chest. A soft knock at her door revealed Mrs. Montgomery, now dressed more casually in a house dress rather than the fine gown she'd worn to supper. "I wanted to make sure you have everything you need," she said, her sharp eyes taking in the room. "And to speak plainly, woman to woman," Delilah nodded, uncertain what was coming. "Fletcher told me about how those town gossips treated you after your father's passing, Mrs. Montgomery said, her voice hardening. "Disgraceful behavior, but I want you to understand something about the man who defended you." Delilah waited, her heart quickening inexplicably. "Fletcher Quinn is the finest foreman this territory has ever seen, and a better man than most who claim the title. He doesn't give his trust or friendship easily. If he's taken an interest in your welfare, it's not to be taken lightly." Mrs. Montgomery paused. "He lost his own family in a Comanche raid when he was 15, only survivor." The revelation stunned Delilah. "I had no idea." "He doesn't speak of it," Mrs. Montgomery said, "but I thought you should know that when he told those people you don't owe them strength, he wasn't just being kind. He was speaking from experience." After Mrs. Montgomery left, Delilah sat on the edge of her bed, turning this new knowledge over in her mind. It explained something about the depth she'd sensed in Fletcher, the quiet understanding beyond his years. As she drifted to sleep that night, Delilah found herself thinking not of her grief, but of a weathered cowboy with kind eyes who'd understood her tears because he'd shed his own. Monday morning dawned with a flurry of activity. Delilah dressed carefully in her most practical teaching dress and pinned Fletcher's silver comb in her hair. The schoolroom, though rustic, had been thoughtfully arranged with crude but functional desks, a blackboard, and shelves containing a surprising number of books. "Mr. Montgomery believes in education," Fletcher explained when he stopped by mid-morning. "Says an ignorant cowhand is a dangerous one." The children, 7 in total, including the Montgomerys, ranged from 6 to 12 years old. They eyed their new teacher with a mixture of curiosity and wariness that Delilah remembered well from her teaching days in Boston. "Today we'll assess where each of you stands in your studies," she announced, trying to project confidence she didn't entirely feel. "And then we'll establish our rules for learning together." By noon, Delilah had a clear picture of her students' abilities. The oldest, 12-year-old Tommy Jenkins could barely read despite being quick with numbers. 8-year-old Elizabeth Montgomery read at a level well beyond her years, but struggled with simple arithmetic. The youngest children needed the most basic instruction in letters and figures. "They're an uneven bunch," Delilah admitted to Mrs. Montgomery over lunch. "But eager to learn, which is half the battle." "Fletcher mentioned you have a gift for teaching," Mrs. Montgomery said your father spoke of it often. The mention of her father brought a pang of grief, but Delilah pushed through it. He believed education was the key to a better life. "It's why he insisted I attend school even after Mother died, when many would have expected me to keep house instead." That afternoon, while the younger children rested, Delilah worked with the older students on reading skills. As they struggled through simple passages, she recalled Fletcher's words, "You don't owe them strength." Perhaps education was a different kind of strength, one that came not from hiding tears or hardening one's heart, but from knowledge and understanding. The first week passed quickly, each day establishing more of a routine. Delilah found herself rising with the sun, taking breakfast with the family, and then immersing herself in teaching until late afternoon. Evenings were spent preparing lessons, reading, or playing the piano for the Montgomery family's entertainment. Fletcher was often absent, his duties taking him to distant parts of the ranch or into town for supplies. When their paths did cross, he was unfailingly polite but somewhat reserved, as if uncertain how to interact with her now that she was part of the household rather than someone in need of assistance. On Saturday evening, after the children had been put to bed, Mr. Montgomery invited Delilah to join the adults in the parlor. Fletcher was there, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt, though still in his work trousers and boots. "We thought you might enjoy some grown-up conversation after a week with the little savages," Mrs. Montgomery said with a smile. "And Fletcher here has news from town." Fletcher nodded. "Sheriff got a lead on the gang that robbed the stage. They've been tracked to a hideout near the territorial border." Delilah's heart quickened. "The men who killed my father, likely," Fletcher confirmed, his expression grim. "Sheriff's forming a posse, asked if any Rockingham hands wanted to join." "And you said yes, of course," Mr. Montgomery interjected, pouring whiskey into glasses. "Take Diego and Lewis with you, they're both good in a fight." Fletcher accepted a glass but didn't drink immediately. "We ride out tomorrow at dawn." Delilah felt a cold fear grip her heart. She'd only just found her footing here, and the thought of Fletcher riding into danger unsettled her deeply. "Is it very dangerous?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Could be," Fletcher admitted. "These aren't men who'll surrender easily." "Then why go?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. Fletcher's eyes met hers directly. "Because men like that don't stop until someone stops them." He paused. "And because your father deserves justice." The simple declaration silenced the room. Mr. Montgomery raised his glass. "To justice, then? And to Thomas Evans, a good man who deserved better than he got." They all drank, even Delilah taking a small sip of the fiery liquid that burned a path down her throat. Later, as the men discussed logistics and Mrs. Montgomery retired early with a headache, Delilah found herself alone with Fletcher on the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the dark sky like diamond dust. "I wanted to thank you," she said softly, "for remembering my father in this." Fletcher leaned against the porch railing, his profile sharp against the night sky. "A man's death should mean something. Too many out here don't. Including your families." The words slipped out before Delilah could consider their impact. Fletcher stiffened slightly. "Mrs. Montgomery told you." "Only that you lost them. I'm sorry if I spoke out of turn." He was quiet for so long that Delilah feared she'd offended him irreparably. Finally, he sighed. "It was a long time ago. I was just a boy when our homestead was raided. By the time I got back from hunting, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies." Delilah's heart ached for the boy he'd been. "How did you survive after? Army patrol found me half dead from exposure. Took me to a fort where I worked as a stable boy until I was old enough to ride with them." He turned to look at her directly. "That's how I know about grief, Delilah, and why I won't stand for anyone mocking tears that are honestly shed." Impulsively, she reached out and touched his arm. "Please be careful tomorrow." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or something deeper. "I will," he promised, covering her hand briefly with his own. The following morning, Delilah rose before dawn and made her way to the stables. Fletcher was already there, saddling his horse in the lantern light. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable. "I wanted to wish you Godspeed," she said, holding out a small package wrapped in cloth, "and to give you this." Fletcher took it, unwrapping the cloth to reveal her father's pocket watch. "Delilah, I can't accept this." "It's not a gift," she clarified, "just a loan." "I need it returned, you understand." Her voice caught slightly. "It's the only thing of value he had left." Understanding dawned in Fletcher's eyes. He was being given a reason to come back safely. "I'll guard it with my life," he said solemnly, tucking the watch into his vest pocket. See that you guard your life with equal care, she replied, trying for lightness but failing. Fletcher mounted his horse as the first pale light of dawn crept over the eastern horizon. I'll be back before you know it, he said. Keep those children in line while I'm gone. Delilah watched him ride away with the two ranch hands, her heart heavy with a worry that seemed disproportionate to their short acquaintance. Something had changed between them last night, a connection forged in shared understanding of loss that went beyond mere friendship. The days that followed were filled with teaching and routine tasks, but Delilah found her thoughts constantly straying to Fletcher and the dangerous mission he'd undertaken. The children seemed to sense her distraction, behaving more wildly than usual until she forced herself to focus fully on their lessons. 5 days after Fletcher's departure, a rider came galloping into the ranch yard as Delilah was dismissing the children for lunch. Mrs. Montgomery emerged from the house, shading her eyes against the midday sun. Diego, she identified the rider. But where are the others? Delilah's heart nearly stopped as she hurried to join Mrs. Montgomery. Diego dismounted, his face grim beneath trail dust and what looked like dried blood. We found them, he reported, accepting a canteen from a stable hand. Holed up in an abandoned mine near the border. Shootout was bad. Fletcher? Mrs. Montgomery asked sharply, voicing the question Delilah couldn't form. Took a bullet in the shoulder, Diego said. Lewis is bringing him in slow. There may be half a day behind me. Relief washed over Delilah, followed immediately by renewed worry. How badly is he hurt? Diego glanced at her, something knowing in his expression. He's tough, Miss Evans. Bullet went clean through, but he lost blood and the trail's rough. Mrs. Montgomery sprang into action, ordering the cook to prepare broth and the housekeeper to ready a bed in the small infirmary room off the kitchen. Delilah, can you manage the children this afternoon? I need to prepare for Fletcher's arrival. Of course, Delilah assured her, though her mind was racing with concern. She somehow got through the afternoon lessons, though she doubted any of the children absorbed much. As evening approached, Delilah found herself repeatedly glancing out the schoolroom windows toward the road. Finally, just as the sun dipped toward the mountains, she saw riders approaching, one slumped in the saddle, supported by another. Class dismissed, she announced abruptly, hurrying outside. Lewis was half carrying Fletcher into the house by the time Delilah reached them. Fletcher's face was gray beneath his tan, his shirt dark with dried blood, but his eyes were open, and they found Delilah's as he was helped past. I have something that belongs to you, he said, his voice raspy but determined. Later, she whispered, stepping back to let them pass. Dr. Simmons arrived from town an hour later, summoned by a ranch hand riding at breakneck speed. He emerged from the infirmary room after a tense examination, wiping his hands on a towel. Clean wound, but he's lost blood and there's risk of fever, he reported to the anxious group in the kitchen. The next 24 hours will tell. He needs rest, fluids, and watching. I'll sit with him, Mrs. Montgomery said immediately. No, madam, Mr. Montgomery countered. You've the children to mind, and you've barely slept yourself these past days. I'll do it, Delilah volunteered. I don't mind, Mrs. Montgomery studied her for a moment, then nodded. Very well. Call me if there's any change. Fletcher was asleep or unconscious when Delilah entered the small room, his shoulder bandaged and his breathing shallow but regular. She settled into the chair beside his bed, noting with concern the unnatural flush in his cheeks that suggested fever was already taking hold. Throughout the night, Delilah bathed Fletcher's forehead with cool cloths as his temperature rose. He drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently, other times opening his eyes with startling clarity. During one such lucid moment near dawn, he reached for her hand. The outlaws. Diego says the sheriff's men got them all, she assured him, clasping his fingers gently. One survived to stand trial, the rest won't trouble anyone again. Fletcher nodded, seemingly satisfied. Your father would be pleased. I think he would, Delilah agreed, blinking back sudden tears. Now rest, you've done enough. His eyes drifted closed again, but his hand remained in hers, a connection that felt increasingly natural and necessary. The fever broke late the following day, much to Dr. Simmons' approval. "You're a lucky man, Quinn," he declared. "Inch to the left and we'd be digging your grave instead of changing your bandages." "Always been lucky," Fletcher replied with a weak smile. "And well tended," the doctor added, glancing meaningfully at Delilah, who blushed under his knowing gaze. As Fletcher recovered, Delilah divided her time between teaching and visiting his sickroom. They talked more freely than before, sharing stories of their pasts and discovering unexpected commonalities despite their different upbringings. "I always wanted to see the ocean," Fletcher admitted one evening as Delilah read to him from a book of poetry she'd found in the Montgomery Library. "Never made it farther east than St. Louis, though." "It's magnificent," Delilah told him, setting aside the book. "Terrifying and beautiful at once. The first time I saw it as a child, I thought it must be what infinity looks like." "Is that why you came west, looking for more infinity?" There was genuine curiosity in his question. Delilah considered this. "I came because my father needed a fresh start after Mother died, but I think I stayed because there's a different kind of infinity here. The sky feels closer somehow." Fletcher nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Out here you can see the edges of yourself better," he said, "nothing to hide behind." 2 weeks after the shooting, Fletcher was allowed to leave his sickroom, though his arm remained in a sling, and Dr. Simmons strictly forbade any strenuous activity for at least another month. "You're lucky Mrs. Montgomery values you so highly," the doctor said sternly. "Most ranch hands would be replaced after such an injury." "I'm indispensable," Fletcher deadpanned, earning a laugh from Mr. Montgomery. "Near enough," the rancher agreed, "but you'll follow orders and rest properly, or I'll have Delilah here report on your every move." The idea sent an unexpected thrill through Delilah, quickly suppressed. Fletcher's recovery had created a peculiar intimacy between them, but she reminded herself that his kindness and their growing friendship didn't necessarily imply deeper feelings. As spring gave way to summer, Fletcher gradually resumed his duties, starting with light tasks around the main ranch house and barn. He often lingered near the schoolroom during lessons, ostensibly repairing tack or whittling, though Delilah suspected his presence had more to do with proximity than necessity. The children quickly grew accustomed to his presence, often racing to show him their work during breaks or begging for stories of his adventures. Fletcher obliged with appropriate tales, carefully edited for young ears but still exciting enough to keep them enthralled. "You're good with them," Delilah observed one afternoon as the children scattered for their midday meal. Fletcher shrugged his good shoulder. "They're honest, say what they mean and mean what they say. Rare quality out here." "Or anywhere," Delilah agreed, gathering her teaching materials. "There's a social at the church in town Saturday next," Fletcher said abruptly, as if the words had escaped before he could reconsider them. "Dance, supper, that sort of thing. Thought you might want to go." Delilah looked up in surprise. "Are you asking to escort me, Mr. Quinn?" A faint color appeared beneath Fletcher's tan. "If that would be agreeable, Miss Evans." The formality made her smile. After all they'd shared, the sudden return to proper address seemed almost comical. "It would be very agreeable, Fletcher." His answering smile transformed his face, erasing the habitually guarded expression he wore around others. "Good, that's good." Word of their planned outing spread quickly through the ranch, causing knowing looks from the adults and giggles from the children. Mrs. Montgomery insisted on helping Delilah freshen her best dress, adding lace from her own collection to the collar and cuffs. "It's not every day our schoolteacher steps out with the foreman," she said, her nimble fingers working the needle expertly. "And Fletcher deserves some happiness after everything." "We're just friends," Delilah protested weakly. Mrs. Montgomery gave her a skeptical look. "If you say so, my dear." Saturday arrived clear and surprisingly cool for late June. Fletcher appeared at the main house promptly at 4, freshly shaved and wearing a clean suit that Mrs. Montgomery had altered to accommodate his healing shoulder. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he'd even polished his boots to a military shine. "You look very handsome," Delilah said honestly as he helped her into the buggy he'd borrowed for the occasion. "And you're beautiful," he replied simply, his directness stealing her breath more effectively than any flowery compliment could have done. The drive to town was pleasant, filled with comfortable conversation and occasional companionable silences. Delilah realized she felt more at ease with Fletcher than she had with anyone since her mother's death. Cottonwood Springs had changed since Delilah had left. New buildings had sprung up, and the main street was busy with activity as they arrived. Several people nodded greetings as Fletcher helped her down from the buggy. "News travels fast," he murmured as they walked toward the church. "Everyone knows you're the Rockingham schoolteacher now." The social was already in full swing, with a local trio providing lively music and tables laden with food prepared by the church ladies. Delilah felt a moment's apprehension as they entered. These were the same townspeople who had mocked her grief months ago. Mrs. Henshaw spotted them immediately, making her way over with a smile that seemed genuine enough. "Miss Evans, how wonderful to see you again. We've heard such good things about your teaching at the Rockingham." "Thank you," Delilah replied cautiously. "The children are a joy to teach, Mrs. Henshaw's gaze flickered to Fletcher, who stood protectively close to Delilah's side. "And Mr. Quinn, I hear you had quite the adventure with those outlaws. Very brave." "Just doing what needed doing," Fletcher said neutrally. As they moved through the crowd, Delilah was surprised by the warm reception. People who had either criticized her or stood silently by during her moment of grief now greeted her with apparent sincerity. Whether it was Fletcher's presence, her new status as the ranch schoolteacher, or genuine remorse, she couldn't tell. "Dance with me?" Fletcher asked as the musicians struck up a waltz. "Are you sure your shoulder can manage it?" Delilah asked, concerned for this. "I dance with a bullet in both shoulders," he said with unexpected intensity. On the dance floor, Fletcher proved to be surprisingly graceful despite his injury. His hand at her waist was warm and steady, guiding her through the steps with practiced ease. "Where did you learn to dance like this?" she asked, genuinely curious. It seemed at odds with his rugged cowboy persona. A smile touched his lips. "Army officers' wives took pity on us young recruits, said we needed civilizing. Turned out I had some natural ability." "They taught you well," Delilah said, enjoying the sensation of being guided expertly around the floor. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, ate at a table with friendly ranchers and their wives, and gradually relaxed into the celebration. Delilah found herself laughing more freely than she had in months, especially at Fletcher's dry observations about the town's characters. "Sheriff's had 3 cups of lemonade that's mostly whiskey," he murmured at one point, nodding toward the increasingly red-faced lawman. Tradition at these gatherings. They were preparing to leave when a commotion near the door caught everyone's attention. A group of cowboys from a neighboring ranch had arrived, already rowdy from drinking elsewhere. Their leader, a tall man with a swagger and an elaborate mustache, spotted Fletcher immediately. "Well, look who's here, the hero of Cottonwood Springs," he called loudly. "Heard you got shot playing lawman, Quinn, slowing down in your old age." Fletcher's posture stiffened, but his voice remained calm. "Evening, Ryder. Surprised they let you in given what happened at the last social." Several people laughed nervously, suggesting some past incident that Delilah wasn't privy to. Ryder's face darkened as he stalked toward them. "Still hiding behind that fancy Eastern education, I see," he said, turning his attention to Delilah. "Though I gotta say, Quinn, you picked a prettier schoolmarm than the last one." "That's enough," Fletcher said, his tone carrying a warning that made several nearby men step back. "Miss Evans deserves your respect," Ryder smirked, swaying slightly from drink. "Does she now? Heard she was quite the waterworks show when her pa got shot. Real delicate flower." The cruel words struck Delilah like a physical blow. She felt tears threatening and fought desperately to hold them back, unwilling to prove Ryder right. Fletcher moved with unexpected speed for a man still recovering from a gunshot wound. In one fluid motion, he had Ryder by the collar, backing him against the nearest wall. The room went silent. "You don't talk about her," Fletcher said, his voice so low that only those closest could hear. "Not now, not ever." Ryder struggled briefly, then went still as Fletcher's grip tightened. "Easy, Quinn, just having some fun, at a lady's expense," Fletcher replied. "That's not how men behave." The sheriff intervened then, his authority overcoming his inebriation. "Let him go, Fletcher. Ryder here is just leaving. Aren't you, Ryder?" After a tense moment, Fletcher released the other man, who straightened his collar with exaggerated dignity. "No harm meant," Ryder muttered, though his eyes told a different story. "Come on, boys. Place has gone soft anyway." As Ryder and his companions left, the social slowly resumed, though with a subdued quality that suggested the evening was winding down naturally. "I'd like to go," Delilah said quietly to Fletcher, who nodded in immediate understanding. Outside, the night air was cool and fresh after the crowded church hall. Fletcher helped Delilah into the buggy in silence, his movements careful but tight with lingering anger. They were well outside town before he spoke. "I'm sorry about Ryder. He's had a grudge since I bested him in a shooting contest 3 years back." "It wasn't your fault," Delilah assured him, "and you didn't have to defend me, though I appreciate that you did." Fletcher glanced at her, his expression difficult to read in the moonlight. "I meant what I said back in town the day we met. You don't owe anyone your strength. Not then, not now." "I know," Delilah said softly, "but I'm finding it anyway, I think, thanks in part to you." The buggy rolled to a stop as Fletcher pulled on the reins. They were at a scenic overlook, the valley spread out below them in a patchwork of moonlit fields and darker wilderness. The ranch lights twinkled in the distance like earthbound stars. "I wanted to give you something," Fletcher said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew her father's watch, holding it carefully in his palm. As promised, returned safely, Delilah took the watch, her fingers brushing his. "Thank you for keeping it safe." "I have something else too," he continued, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "If you'll allow it." Before Delilah could ask what he meant, Fletcher leaned across the space between them and kissed her gently at first, then with growing certainty as she responded. His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheek with a tenderness that made her heart swell. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since you sat by my sick reading poetry," he admitted. Delilah smiled, feeling a happiness that had seemed impossible in the dark days after her father's death. "I think I've been waiting for you to do it just as long." Their return to the ranch was delayed by several more stops and kisses along the way, but eventually they arrived back at the main house. Fletcher helped Delilah down from the buggy, holding her hand a moment longer than necessary. "Good night, Delilah Evans," he said softly. "Thank you for the honor of your company this evening." "The honor was mine, Fletcher Quinn," she replied, feeling that the formal exchange somehow made their earlier intimacy all the more significant. In the days that followed, their growing attachment became common knowledge at the ranch. The children giggled when Fletcher appeared at the schoolhouse door, and the hands exchanged knowing looks when Delilah brought lunch to the men working in the barn. Mrs. Montgomery merely smiled benignly, as if everything was proceeding according to some plan she'd long envisioned. Summer turned the landscape golden, days stretching long and hot as Fletcher's shoulder healed completely. They found moments to be alone riding together in the cool mornings, walking in the garden after supper, or simply sitting on the porch watching the sun set in spectacular fashion over the western mountains. During one such evening, as the first hint of autumn crispness touched the air, Fletcher took Delilah's hand in his. "I've been thinking about the future," he said, his voice steady despite the nervousness in his eyes. "What about it?" Delilah asked, though her heart had begun to race with anticipation. "Mr. Montgomery has offered me a partnership in a new venture, a smaller ranch property about 10 miles west of here. Says he's getting too old to manage the whole spread himself." Fletcher paused. "It would mean building a life there, a home." Delilah squeezed his hand encouragingly. "That sounds like a wonderful opportunity." "It would be," Fletcher agreed, "with the right person beside me." He took a deep breath. "I know it hasn't been that long since we met, and you might want more time, Fletcher," Delilah interrupted gently. Are you asking me to marry you? A smile broke across his face. I'm making a proper mess of it, aren't I? Yes, Delilah Evans, I'm asking if you would do me the very great honor of becoming my wife. Joy bubbled up inside her, bright and irrepressible. Yes, she said simply. Yes, I will. Fletcher pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that spoke of all they'd come to mean to each other, two souls who had found understanding and healing in their shared experiences of loss and recovery. They were married in the Cottonwood Springs Church on a crisp October day, with the Montgomerys standing as witnesses and the ranch children forming an impromptu choir. Mrs. Henshaw and the other town ladies who had once mocked Delilah's tears presented her with a beautiful wedding quilt, perhaps as atonement for past unkindness. Their new home was modest but well built, standing on a rise that afforded views across the rangeland to distant mountains. Fletcher had worked alongside the ranch hands to ensure it was ready before winter set in, adding special touches like built-in bookshelves for Delilah's growing collection, and a small piano Mr. Montgomery gifted them as a wedding present. On their first night there, as they stood on the porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky, Fletcher wrapped his arms around Delilah from behind, resting his chin atop her head. "Are you happy, Mrs. Quinn?" he asked softly. Delilah leaned back against his solid warmth, feeling a contentment that went bone deep. "Happier than I ever imagined possible after my father died," she admitted. "You gave me hope when I had none, and you gave me a reason to build something permanent," Fletcher replied. "Something more than just surviving." Inside their new home, a lamp burned warm and golden in the window, a beacon of the life they were creating together. On the mantel, her father's watch and Fletcher's mother's silver comb stood side by side, symbols of the past that had shaped them and the future they now embraced. As years passed, their family grew, first a daughter with Fletcher's eyes and Delilah's quiet determination, then twin boys who brought joyful chaos to the ranch. The Rocking Q, as their spread became known, prospered under Fletcher's careful management and Delilah's complementary skills with accounts and correspondence. She continued to teach, first their own children and later those of their ranch hands and neighbors, establishing a small but respected school that drew students from miles around. Fletcher often said, with unabashed pride, that she had brought civilization to their corner of the territory more effectively than any marshal or circuit judge. Sometimes, on quiet evenings when the children were asleep and the day's work done, they would sit together on the porch and marvel at the journey that had brought them together, a terrible loss, a moment of kindness, and the profound understanding that true strength sometimes meant allowing oneself to be vulnerable. "Remember what you said to me that first day?" Delilah would ask, leaning her head against Fletcher's shoulder. "You don't owe them strength," he would reply, pressing a kiss to her hair. "It saved me," she would say simply. "You saved me." And Fletcher would smile, knowing that they had, in truth, saved each other.